Welcome back to another episode of the Co-op Connection podcast. Recently, we gave out our Together We Award, which we give to one of our vendors that shows dedication, resourcefulness, and service to our members, our other vendors, and the co-op as a whole. APS Payroll is our winner for this year, and we are so excited to have them join us on a podcast episode today as we discuss what sets them apart as a payroll and HR service company and the many ways that they can serve our members. We hope you enjoy. Well, welcome, Keegan. We're so glad that you are here to help represent APS Payroll, and I believe you've been a vendor of ours for just over 5 years now. Is that correct?
About that, man. I thought it was actually a little longer because we've been just doing so much good work together, but yeah. I guess it right at 5 years. But no, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah,
we're glad that y'all are here, and obviously our partnership with you guys is very special in what you do. And so what we like to do to start off the podcast is I like to ask whoever's with me to just kind of give a brief history of you and then the company, and then we'll go from there.
Without a doubt. So I'll be quick here, but APS did not start out specializing in working with churches. I always tell churches that it happened to be that the way we built our software and the customer service that we bring versus what's available in this industry really ended up complementing what churches need. And then in terms of my background, I'm a very strong Christian myself, and I never really thought, when I got out of college and I got this job, that I would have a way to serve. And, God works in mysterious ways, and He can work through any channel. And I didn't even try to necessarily make churches my bread and butter, the industry I work with the most, but I've been able through APS to serve a lot of different churches through allowing them to operate more efficiently and better serve their own missions. So it's been a true blessing. I've been doing it for about 8 years now, and I'm always learning, but have definitely seen a lot of areas where we can provide them a lot of value, which is always exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously it's been exciting for us to partner with you because when we have a church that has a need, we're always like, Keegan's on it. So we enjoy it. And you've kind of already started off with the first question that I had, talking about values and kind of the mission that you have. You touched base on it. You started by not really being in the church world, APS as a whole. But now you're kind of known as that payroll and HR software application that what churches need more than anybody else, my opinion. Yeah. So how does your mission and your culture, how does that align with the values that the faith-based organizations that are part of the co-op have?
Our 4 core values as a company are do the right thing, be your best, serve others, and find the fun. And I really think that in this specific industry, the way that we align the most with the churches that we serve is, those core values, but do the right thing and serve others. I really think start to naturally align with any church, because churches at their heart they're a lot of servants coming together and trying to be of service to the community, bring more people to Jesus, be of service to people through that relationship. And it is just very easy to see as you start working with churches that those things really do line up, because if they don't, I've seen it in other areas of companies that have worked with churches where the values of a company and the culture of a company don't end up complementing a church, and that ends up in some way, shape, or form not creating the absolute best relationship. Yeah. So I would say that, from the founding of APS, as we grew and realized how well we worked with churches, those 4 core values, and especially the ones that I had mentioned, have really stuck out in terms of aligning with a lot of the churches we work with. Yeah,
that's great. And just thinking about how you support them, right? They have their missions, they have their goals, and especially having that servant heart. When I think of, and obviously just hearing from our members, they face a lot of different challenges than the cultural business side does, right? The corporate side. They have so many different ins and outs that corporate America might not have to deal with. Yeah. So how do you, and maybe you can share some ways that APS comes alongside them in supporting them so that they can take their mind or their time off of the HR, the payroll side of things, and put it more towards the mission of their church? What are some ways that y'all support them in that?
Man, that's a really great question. And it's kind of, in terms from a payroll processing standpoint, the first thing that would come to anyone's mind is how good can you process housing allowances, minister taxation, things like that. But I think one of the things that you pointed out that a lot of people don't necessarily give churches credit for is they're often much more complex than a for-profit entity, because they have so many different facets of the business side of it, the coffee shop, your daycare, the school that you have aligned with the church, the ministry staff, the volunteer staff. there's so many different places that people can report to and jobs they can be performing for the church that it becomes, very hard to manage very quickly. And as I'm sure you know, with the church you go to or the church I go to, the church anyone goes to, a lot of people come into a church with that servant heart volunteering, not necessarily as a church grows, they're not going to Indeed or they're not going to, places to find these different workers. It's people being called through the Holy Spirit to say, hey, I want to be a part of this mission. I want to do this in a more dedicated fashion. But the downside of that is that because they grow with a lot of people stepping into positions, there's a lot of learning that goes along, and usually that creates a lot of decentralization in terms of, as we grow, we realize we need some type of payroll system. As we grow, we realize we need a donation software. As we grow, we realize that we need to classify our employees a little bit differently versus the volunteers and whatnot. So where we really help them focus on their mission, in my opinion, the most is taking all of those things that come with growth. We're not all of them, we're not a giving software, we're not a benefits provider, but in terms of when it comes to centralizing the back office, it really allows all the different things that people are doing on a day-to-day basis to be put in one place. And what that does, in my opinion, what I've seen over the past 8 years, is it allows the church to grow and scale as they need, and then the people who are involved in that the most to focus on the growth versus having to be held back by the back office workflows. So the system in and of itself takes what usually ends up being, and it's completely fine because a lot of churches, you just end up getting to this point, this system for this system for this system for this, and take as many of those as possible and put them into one place so everyone is operating from one point of entry and they can just do it a lot more efficiently. They can report easier, and again, like you said, it just allows them to focus their time on the mission, whereas it would usually, or in the past, had been focused on trying to make sure all this back office stuff is aligned.
That's a great point, and I think that's one of the things that we've seen at the co-op with how you separate yourselves from other softwares that might be out there is there's an education factor to it. It's not just one of these like, hey, use our software because, we're super, super cheap. And then just hands off. It's one of those things where y'all desire to say, hey, how can we help educate you on where you're at? You have all these volunteers that want to move in and help, but maybe you need to know, well, what does that look like from an HR perspective? What do you need to prepare for that? So I think that's been a huge benefit. And I think when I think through our members, it's like we've both said, the church and even the nonprofit world is so much different than the corporate world, and that it's more complex. And so with that, I think one of the things we find out with our members is some of the biggest things that they want is trust and a relationship. They want to trust the vendors that they use, whoever it may be. And they want that relationship where if something goes wrong or they have questions, they have that with you. So what are some ways that you feel like APS really sets yourself apart with the trust and relationship towards our members, our churches that are part of the co-op, and helping strengthen that relationship with them?
Great question. I would definitely say that, when it comes to the software industry and what I do specifically being payroll and HR software, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, because no matter whether you're a church or whether you're a for-profit business, whatever you might be, you cannot run a business entity without this type of software at a certain point. So it creates the situation where there's an extremely high oversaturation of companies and options for whether you're a church or, like I said, any company. And we're not the only company out there that can process payroll. We're not the only company that can capture time, facilitate HR, facilitate benefits, all the things that we do. What really, in my opinion, differentiates us at the end of the day is two things. One, the service that we offer to churches and all of our other clients. Usually you're going to find that you either get a dedicated rep or a call center you can call into. What our churches really love is they work with a team, and that team is familiar with churches. It's not going to be the first time they've heard about housing allowances when you speak to them. And you speak to them, you know them on a first name basis. There's more than one of them to make sure there's always someone to pick up your phone. And they're knowledgeable on the questions that you're able to ask them, so you don't have to be passed around. So these softwares are complex, and just as a church is complex with all of the different facets of the business side that it's running, the software has to be able to accommodate that. But these churches did not build the software, and nor should they be held responsible for making sure it works as best as it possibly can. So I could work with 1,000 churches and give them great software, but at the end of the day, if they don't have good service behind that software, it is really redundant in terms of what it's trying to do for them. So I would say where we really differentiate ourselves is providing churches with not only service that is much different than what's normally available in this industry, but service that really understands how a church works already, so they're not behind the 8 ball of trying to explain how they work whenever they're trying to make sure the software can maximize its value for them.
No, I cannot agree more with that, because here at the co-op we use APS. I mean, that's one of those things where we love to use our vendors when we can, and y'all have blown us away with the software. And what's funny is it's one of those things where we really don't have to call support, because it's so easy to use, and it's so easy to find, hey, I've got this question. Well, there's this long list of Q&As that y'all have. Go to that. Okay, cool. But when we have had to call, I remember recently we had one where Patty and I had kind of a really unique question, a really unique thing that we needed. And we called our team. We're Team 3, so we're part of that team. We called Team 3. Somebody called back, and Patty was like, yeah, we've got this kind of unique, integral question. Is there somebody that we can talk to? And the lady was like, yeah, I'm here to talk to you about that. And it's just, and so many times when you call even customer service, if a company has customer service, which I feel like is going away, you got to get passed on. And so we were just kind of like, hey, if we need to deal with somebody else. And that lady was like, nope, I got it. 5 minutes later, we had what we needed. And so I think you hit that right on the nail, that y'all's customer service is different. And not just the sense that you're there, but that you're there, you're knowledgeable, and you're educated on it. So I think that's great. I want to kind of pivot, because that was my next question. I was thinking in my head is, what kind of service do you have to offer? But with that, when you talk about a church having some different things that they have to go through, what are some of those intricate things that a church might have to deal with that you feel like you kind of take pride in the fact? I think you talked about like minister housing, things like that.
Housing allowances, minister taxation.
Kind of I would take pride in knowing how to do that, because not a lot of payroll companies can do that. So what are some other things that you're like, you know what, we pride ourselves in besides service?
Well, I'd definitely say the software and its ability to accommodate those types of things. And there's plenty of companies that can do it. It's usually just getting someone on the phone who understands what you're trying to do. Because, can a software technically tax it correctly? Can it technically classify it correctly, make sure it goes to the right box on the W-2? Yes. There's softwares out there that can do that, companies out there that can do that, but there's a real difference in terms of when you reach out to someone who understands what you're talking about versus you having to lead them to that place. And, that creates a lot less drag in customer service. Like you said, I don't want someone calling customer service every single day. That's not a good sign, right. But when they do get in contact with them, they really need to make sure that it's as efficient as possible and that, they're knowledgeable on what they're talking about. But I would say other, nuances that are very much accommodated through our software and that really allow churches to operate as efficiently as possible is one of the things that I see, or if I call into a church, a common pain point is that they have people that are playing multiple roles. You might have someone who's a musician that does your Sunday service and gets paid one way, but they're also a youth director, or you might have your ministry staff and who are salaried, and then you have your security guards who are going to be paid much differently, or maybe there's a lot of people playing a lot of different roles. There's a lot of people wearing different hats, and that creates a lot of complexity from a reporting structure, because regardless of how complex it is, it needs to be done correctly. And obviously one of the main missions of any church is to be a good steward of the finances you're entrusted with. And I spoke recently at the TCN a little bit about this, is when you don't have those things facilitated correctly and you're doing work outside of the system, it is very often going to have a negative impact on your finances, very often going to have a negative impact on what you can do with the finances you're entrusted with. And it very often becomes a source of, we don't want to use the word waste, but a source of, inefficiency where otherwise it could be a lot more efficient. And like we said earlier, people could be focusing on adding their energy or their, whatever they bring to the table to the mission, but instead they're writing down time cards and chasing people down and collecting them and whatnot, and having trouble figuring out where this person reported to or that person reported to. So I would say that outside of just the traditional nuances from a tax reporting standpoint, it's really just all of the different things going on in a church, being able to add clarity to that, to where when you look into it, or when someone needs to look into it, or someone needs to implement some type of new workflow or efficiency, whatever you want to call it, that they have an easy platform to do that with. And I think APS, from what I have seen and the way our software is built, it really just accommodates a lot of those different one-off situations or nuances that you're probably not going to find in a corporate environment.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
And I was wondering, you had actually mentioned one of our members to us that you've been recently talking to, a success story, if you will. Would you mind kind of, we don't have to go into any names, but would you mind kind of like talking about what kind of went through with that process with them, and how you came alongside to help meet their needs and almost their frustrations that they had?
Yeah, it was, I won't say any names just for the sake of, their own privacy. I didn't tell them I was going to tell this story, but it is a church here in Houston, and it's one of my favorite stories because I was working with one of their administrators, and unbeknownst to me, we didn't have everyone in the entire conversation. I had no idea. So we're working together. He ends up loving the product versus the company that they were with. I'm not going to say any other company names either. And he signs the proposal, and then as we're starting implementation, one day I get a call from one of their administrators. She was very upset, and she calls me, and she had said something along the lines of, "I feel like this was done behind my back." Mm-hmm. She was a big fan of the company they were currently with, so she really wanted to stay with them. Yeah. He was the ultimate decision maker. He said no. That was creating some conflict for them. And, I said, "I'm so sorry. If I would have known or been told, I would have included you in every conversation. I would have never left someone out." That's, I felt bad because I felt I didn't do my due diligence in my job, because I've, had no idea that, she needed to be a part of that. But, obviously the decision had been made, and we were moving forward. And then, a couple months later, as the implementation was over, she called me back, or she sent the project manager an email and asked him to communicate it to me. And she had said, "We are such big fans of APS that I really would like you guys to send us shirts that we could wear around the church and the school." And what that tells me, to more directly answer your question, is that, as I was saying earlier, there's a lot of companies out there that can technically do the jobs that we're doing for churches, sure, but there's a difference in terms of the nuances that you can accommodate around tax reporting, around the scalability they need, around the configuration that they need, the security standards that need to be met. And what this told me was that there's a lot of churches out there who believe the options are what the options are. Mm-hmm. And what's on the table is as good as it's going to get, and it doesn't have the opportunity to get any better. And that's why we love working with the church co-op, because it allows us to get our voice out there and really just show that not only are there better options, and not saying any company can't do good for a church. There's plenty of companies that sure, churches love and swear by, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of companies, like I said, that believe that what's on the table is only going to be there, and that's all they have to decide from. And when they see that there is something that is much more dedicated towards allowing them to focus on their mission, much more dedicated to understanding how they work without them having to coach that up, and just much more dedicated to this industry in general, it's usually a breath of fresh air. Mm. And it is really fun to see people go down that path of, I've been doing this for years, this is what I know, there's nothing different, right, and then find APS and say, I wish I would have known you guys 10 years ago. Yep. We would have been with you the whole time. So I really enjoy that, and just being able to have those conversations in my memory as things to bring up when I'm talking to other churches.
Well, we sure do appreciate you. We appreciate APS Payroll. Obviously, we're huge supporters. I've got my cup that I use every day. We use y'all every day, and I really hope that what people get out of this is that y'all are different.
Yeah.
It's just like we've been talking about. Other companies could do it, but there's something special at APS. And obviously we know you and your whole team we've known for a long time. And so there's like that synergy with us, which
Without
I love.
A doubt.
So I would just encourage any of our members that maybe are even just looking and saying, hey, maybe this is something we need to look into, to give you a call and at least talk through what kind of options they have, because they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
But we do appreciate y'all. So thank you for coming on and taking time, and we'll make sure we leave your information at the end, and so that people can reach out to you.
Without a doubt. And one last thing before we go, I always like to, to similar to something you just said, One thing I love about working for my company is the honesty that we bring to the table. We're never going to bring on a client that we don't think we can actually help and put in a better spot. So for the churches that are out there that are with vendors they've been with for a while, I'm not encouraging in any way, shape, or form to jump ship and leave, but it's always good to take a look, because the best time to take a look is when you're not needing to make a change, and that way there's no pressure. And I would just say that there's nothing to lose from taking that look and seeing what else is out there. And if APS becomes part of that conversation, then like I said, we'll be real honest with whether or not we think we can help you out the most.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you, Keegan. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Topher.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Co-op Connection podcast. For more information about the Church Co-op and APS Payroll, please visit our website, www.churchcoop.org.